We often think of history as just a collection of facts, right? What happened, where it happened, when it happened. But what if the real story isn't just in the events themselves, but in how they were written down, and maybe more importantly, why they were written that way? Today, we're basically going to be historical detectives. We're going to look at one of the most legendary figures in European history, Charlemagne, and see how the official records were carefully, and I mean carefully, crafted to build a myth. So let's dive in. So picture this, a young monk sitting in a monastery reading the glorious history of his emperor. All he sees is victory after victory. He looks over to an older, wiser monk and asks, "Did our great King Charlemagne ever, lose?" And the old monk just shakes his head and says this. Now, full disclosure, we made that quote up, but it gets right to the heart of our investigation. It's this perfect little hint that there's another story buried just beneath the surface, a story the official court historians really, really didn't want you to know. So, what are these annals he's talking about? Well, in the early Middle Ages, this was pretty much how history got recorded. Think of it like a logbook. Real simple stuff. 741 AD, Charles, the mayor of the palace, died. That's it. A lot of them actually started as just little notes jotted down in the margins of calendars used to calculate Easter. But under Charlemagne's family, the Carolingians, this humble little logbook was about to get a major upgrade and get turned into a seriously powerful political weapon. Okay, so first, let's start with the official story, the legend. This is the version of Charlemagne that's been passed down for centuries. The perfect Christian king, the military genius, a ruler who just couldn't lose. The picture we get is this guy who is totally blessed by God, right? He's expanding the Christian world. He's ruling in perfect harmony with his people. In this story, he holds these big meetings, he listens to everyone's advice, and then he leads his armies from one glorious win to the next. It's a heroic portrait for sure. Almost too good to be true. And that, as we're about to see, is because it was completely designed that way. So who was the artist behind this flawless portrait? This wasn't just a bunch of different historians all happening to agree with each other. Nope. This was a coordinated effort, a medieval propaganda machine running at the absolute heart of the empire. And here is our primary source. And, let's be honest, our primary suspect, the Annales Regni Francorum. We'll just call it the RF. These were the official yearbooks of the Frankish Empire, and they were written by scribes who were working directly for Charlemagne's court. This wasn't history written by some neutral observer. This was a state-sponsored story, designed from the ground up to project a very, very specific image of the people in charge. And the ARF had a very clear playbook for building this myth. First, establish that the Carolingian family is chosen by God. That's rule number one. Second, make sure every single war is justified. They're always defending the church or punishing bad guys. Third, erase any hint of problems at home. Everything is unified, everyone is happy. And here's the kicker. If you lose a battle, it just didn't happen. The ARF wasn't just recording history, it was literally manufacturing legitimacy. And here's a perfect example. The Battle of Roncevaux Pass. It was a total disaster, a catastrophic ambush that wiped out a huge part of Charlemagne's army. But if you look it up in the official ARF, it's spun as a success. And all those massive losses of men and treasure, poof, gone, wiped from the record. If a fact got in the way of the myth of the invincible king, it simply vanished. But here's the thing about stories like this. No story is perfect. And when you start looking outside the official history, you start to see the cracks. You find other records, other annals, that tell a completely different tale. And this is where our investigation really gets interesting. Meet the minor annals. These were written in monasteries, often way out in the provinces, far from the king's court. And because of that, they had a much more local view of things. They weren't trying to build some grand imperial myth. They were just recording what was going on in their little corner of the world. And what you get is a picture of the time that is so much messier, and honestly, so much more human. And it's inside these minor annals that we start to hear the voices that were written out of the official story. These are the tales of the rivals, the rebels, the people who were conquered. These are the stories of the losers in Charlemagne's Game of Thrones. All right, let's open up case file number 1. This one comes from a text called the Annales Petaviani, and this record keeps the memory alive of some very inconvenient family members, people who represented a different path for the kingdom, and who, for that reason, had to be erased. See, the official story makes it seem like Charlemagne's rise to sole ruler was smooth, no questions asked. But this and all reminds us of the ghosts in the family tree. It makes a point of mentioning the birth of a son to Charlemagne's brother, Carloman, which is a not-so-subtle way of saying, hey, this other kid was a king's son, and he had a pretty strong claim to the throne.
It also records the rebellion of Charlemagne's own son, Pippin the Hunchback. You won't find these stories in the ARF. No way. They mess up the neat little myth of a perfectly unified, God-given dynasty.
Okay, on to case file number 2. This one from the Annales Nazariani takes us even deeper. It shows us the resistance that was bubbling just under the surface of the empire, and it reveals the brutal reality of how Charlemagne dealt with anyone who stood in his way. So get this story. A story the ARF just pretends never happened. A group of nobles in a region called Thuringia feel like the king is stepping on their toes, so they plot to kill him. The plot gets discovered, but instead of a simple arrest, we see this complex negotiation. The rebels are promised mercy, if they surrender. They do, and then later they're blinded and exiled. This shows a much, much darker side of Charlemagne's rule. This wasn't the just king of the official records. This was a calculated, ruthless political operator. And this slide? Wow, this one might show the biggest difference of all. In the official ARF, the downfall of Duke Tassilo of Bavaria is presented like a simple court case. He was a traitor, he had a fair trial in public, he got what was coming to him. But the Annales Nazariani tells a completely different story. It was pure muscle. Tassilo only gave up after Charlemagne surrounded him with 3 massive armies. His confession was forced out of him, and his humiliation happened in private, not in some big public show of justice. So what does that tell you? From where the Bavarians were sitting, this wasn't justice. It was, as their records suggest, simply the successful application of overwhelming power. This was the story of a local power getting systematically crushed by an imperial war machine. It was a conquest, plain and simple, not a legal proceeding. Which brings us right to the heart of it all. Why do this? Why go to all the trouble of carefully crafting one history while squashing another? Well, it's because Charlemagne's court understood something really fundamental about power. For them, history wasn't just this passive thing you wrote down about what happened yesterday. No, it was an active, powerful tool. It was a way to make their rules seem legitimate right now, and to give their kids and grandkids a blueprint for staying in power in the future. By creating this foundational myth of an unbroken line of divinely chosen winners, they were forging a political weapon. So, in the end, you've got 2 different kinds of history, doing 2 totally different jobs. The official history, the RAF, that was all about projection, projecting an image of unstoppable power to create a legacy. But the minor annals, their job was preservation. They were preserving the memory of what was lost, the memory of resistance, and all the messy, inconvenient stories the empire wanted everyone to just forget. And this whole investigation really leaves us with one massive question. When we read any history, we are almost always reading the story told by the winners. The case of Charlemagne is this powerful reminder to always, always ask, whose voice are we not hearing? Whose story got erased or twisted or just plain ignored? It really makes you think, doesn't it? What stories might be missing from the history that you know?